So let's practice some AV blocks. Let's look at the strips and go through the rules to determine which AV block it is. So this first strip, I have an atrial rate of around 70 and a ventricular rate of around 70. So that already tells me that I've got a P wave for every QRS and a QRS for every P wave. It is a regular rhythm, and my P wave is normal. But look at my PRI. My PRI is 0.31 seconds. So that's obviously greater than 0.20 seconds. And then my QRS, it's narrow at 0.04 seconds. So my underlying rhythm here is a sinus rhythm. But I've got something to add to it. Because I've got constant PRIs that are greater than 0.20 seconds, I've got a sinus rhythm with a first degree AV block. So again, always remember that you're going to have an underlying rhythm with your first degree AV block. The second one. So again, it looks like we've got a P wave for every QRS and a QRS for every P wave. We've got an atrial and ventricular rate of 80 beats per minute. We've got a regular rhythm. And we've got normal upright looking P waves. They're a little notched, but we're not looking for that right now. But look at our PRI. Our PRI is 0.36 seconds, which is greater than 0.20 seconds. So that gives me a clue as to what I'm working with. And my QRS is narrow at 0.08 seconds. So again, I've got P waves that are consistent across the board. I've got a sinus rhythm with a first degree AV block. Let's look at the next example. So let's just go through the rules. So I've got my rate, my rhythm, my P wave, my PRI, and my QRS. So my atrial rate is 70, but my ventricular rate is 50. So that tells me there's something going on here. My rhythm, it is irregular. Look at my P waves. They look sinus in nature, so they're normal looking. My PRIs. So let's measure. So this one here looks like it's about 0.16 or so. But then look at this one. This one gets even longer. And then we have a drop beat where a QRS should be. Then we have a PRI that is getting wider, and then a dropped beat. So how do I describe this PRI? I'd say that it is a progressively widening PRI. And my QRS is 0.08 seconds, measuring from here to about right there. Make that bigger so you can see it. So I have atrial rates that are different. So I've got a P wave for every QRS, but I don't have a QRS for every P wave. And I've got a progressively widening PRI. So what do I have? Now with your second degree and your third degree AV blocks, you do not have an underlying rhythm. So this would just be a second degree AV block type 1, or you could say A Mobitz 1 second degree. Or you could say is a Winky Bot. The same thing here. I've got an atrial rate that's higher than the ventricular rate. I've got an atrial rate of 80, a ventricular rate of 60. So don't forget, my P to P intervals are going to be constant. So there should be another P wave right here. It's just hidden. And the same thing for here as well. It's irregular. The P waves look normal. But my PRI is progressively widening until I have a drop beat. My QRS is wide at 0.16 seconds. So what do I have? I have a second degree type 1. In this ECG, we see grouping, which would be clearer if we had a longer strip. The PR intervals progressively lengthen until there is a pause or a drop in the beat. The block P wave is not visible because it's buried in the T wave of the last complex indicated by the blue arrow. The incremental amount of delay is definitely shorter between the second and third complexes. However, since the third P is partially buried, the true measurement cannot be determined. You have a partially buried P wave right there. So these are little things that you need to be watching out for, because not every strip is going to be a perfect computer generated strip. So what I'll notice here is that I've got an atrial rate of 50. Got an atrial rate of 50, ventricular rate of 40. I've got a regular rhythm. I've got a P wave that's normal. I've got a widened PRI. So I've got a PRI that's 0.36 seconds. And I've got a QRS that's 0.08 seconds. But one thing I notice about my PRI across the board is that it's constant. Every PRI that I see is 0.36 seconds. I've got a P wave for every QRS, but I do not have a QRS for every P wave. I've got 2 conducted P waves for 1 conducted QRS. So what do I have? I've got a 2-to-1 untypable AV block. Got an atrial rate of 80, ventricular rate of 40. I've got a regular rhythm. I've got a normal P wave. I've got a PRI of 0.20 seconds, and it's constant for the conducted beats. And I've got a QRS of 0.06 seconds. I've got a P wave for every QRS, but I do not have a QRS for every P wave. For every 2 conducted P waves, I only have 1 QRS complex. So again, I've got a 2 to 1 untypable. This rhythm, I've got an atrial rate of around 60 to 70. I've got a ventricular rate of around 40. The P waves are regular and the QRSs are regular, but it's irregular, or they're not regular together. The P waves are sinus P waves, and we're going to have a sinus rate here. There is no PRI, and the QRS is wide at 0.14 seconds. So there is no correlation between the P wave and the QRS, so I've got a complete heart block, or a 3rd degree AV block. This arrow is pointing to where a P wave is hidden. Don't forget to count your P waves. This one is a pretty drastic rhythm. I've got an atrial rate of 100, but a ventricular rate of 20. My P's regular, my QRS is regular, but they're not regular together. The P waves are sinus P waves. There is no PRI, and my QRS complexes are wide and ventricular in nature. I have no correlation between a P wave and a QRS, and these blue arrows are pointing to where these blue arrows are pointing to where P waves are hidden. I've got a 3rd degree AV block. So you've got a sinus rhythm that's tachycardic, but it's completely blocked from reaching the ventricles. The ventricles are paced by ventricular scape, so real low in the ventricles at about 20 beats per minute. Notice wide QRS complexes with abnormal ST segments and T waves. So, as you continue practicing, remember that you've got 3 main types of heart blocks. You've got a 1st degree AV block, which is more of a delay. You've got a 2nd degree AV block type 1, where your PR intervals are getting longer and longer and longer until they drop. You've got a 2nd degree type 2, where you have constant PR intervals, but you have drop beats. And you have a 3rd degree AV block that has no correlation between the atria and the ventricles. There's no PRI, there's no relationship there. The atria is being paced by its own pacemaker, and the ventricles are being paced by their own pacemaker, and the block is complete at the AV node.